Two legends in the same video. You have probably seen this video where Joe Rogan is interviewing Pavel Tsatsouline. Pavel shares some great secrets, some great wisdom, and there's also some stuff that we can have a discussion about, and some things are very funny. So let's jump into the reaction right away. But before we get started, I have a gift for you. 30 days filled with kettlebell workouts for free. Check the first link in the description. Goedenavond, Gregory von Lebe Stark here. Let's jump right into the reaction.
What do you do now? Like, first of all, how old are you?
20.
You look great.
Thanks. Thank you. Great haircut, too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I like it. How old are you really?
I'm working on being 20, Joe. Let's stick with that.
Working on going back?
Yeah.
I'm 52. Are you older than me?
I'm working. We're both working on going back. How about we stick with that?
This has been going around as a meme for quite some time in the kettlebell world. Pavel not sharing his age and this awkward silence between the two.
How often do you train these days?
How often do I train? Almost every day.
Almost every day.
Yeah.
Just doing something differently.
Yeah, doing something different.
Mostly kettlebells, or?
For the last several years, with I suppose last several months, we're kind of experimental doing something else. But for the last several years, pretty much has been nothing but swings and dips. Just one of my protocols.
So one of my friends, his name is Joey from Kettle Jitsu, had a great laugh when Pavel was sharing his workout secret. He said, "What kind of training is this?" Now, while I get it to a certain extent that it sounds fairly minimal, we have to understand that Pavel is the minimalist guy. For example, Simple and Sinister, one of his most popular kettlebell workout programs is the swing and the get up. And from my perspective, I think it's a great combination. I like the minimalistic approach, even though sometimes it might be too minimalistic, depending on what you are. For example, if you are a high-level athlete, you have to switch it up every once in a while. And even for us normal folks who just train to stay in shape, switching it up might make some sense. Variety is good if you get a lot of bang for your buck. And the most important nugget of truth that we can take away from Pavel's statement is, if he likes doing swings and dips, well, keep going. And the same goes for you. If you like what you do right now, then keep going. You don't have to change a winning horse, and you don't have to fix anything that is not broken.
It's a very particular anti-glycolytic protocol. Anti-glycolytic means, well, the kind of thing we just discussed.
Just swings and dips.
And just to make it clear what he was talking about, the anti-glycolytic protocol, the idea of Pavel's training is to not go into the red zone, to not go into the burn. So his mentality is that you can build strength without going into the zone where you are overcharging your systems. Now, while I do agree to a certain extent, depending on your philosophy or what your goal is, if your goal is to build strength, ultimately, you have to do it a little bit differently. However, if you want to build your endurance and you want to take it to the next step and you want to progress to a level in another field, for example, muscle building, then you have to go into the red zone to a certain extent. However, I think the current climate that we have, and this is what Pavel was discussing with Joe, is that we go into the red zone too often.
Why that combination?
Trying to be minimalist, pretty much, and trying to cover as much base as possible. Also trying to do things that my body likes. But the swings are, I would argue that the swing is the most beneficial exercise anybody can do. Because you will, again, you're training power, you're training your fast fibers, you're developing mitochondria in the fast fibers.
So while I agree with Pavel, I've also heard another statement as it relates to power, how much power you can develop with a swing. Dr. Michael Yesses, who is one of the most famous and the biggest biomechanists in the Western Hemisphere, said that if you want to build power, you have to take away momentum and the ballistic element. And kettlebells offer the momentum and the ballistic element. And to a certain extent, I think that you can kind of replicate the idea of Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky when it comes to depth jumps, yet Dr. Michael Yesses sees this a little bit differently. So this is why I think it's so important to listen to different voices and different professions so you can make up your own mind.
I like the idea of very minimalist general strength protocols that just have pretty much a hip hinge and the press.
I'm in a similar camp like Pavel is. What I like to incorporate is something for the lower body and something for the upper body. And I think many people sometimes get it confused. They think, well, I should do about 10 sets for one muscle group if I want to focus on maximum muscle building, right? This might be the case, but with kettlebells, we also have different goals, and this means that the training protocol will also be a little bit different. So like I mentioned, Pavel's totally into the minimalistic idea.
Chin-ups or things along those lines.
Sure, it's great. I'll do them sometime. But you will find, to your surprise, that if you do swings powerfully, and if you do dips or push-ups powerfully, chances are you're not going to lose your chin-ups.
Really?
Chances are, for most people. So here's something to keep in mind. What is general training versus specific training? So in Russian sports science, there is a concept of general training versus special training. Special means sport specific, pretty much. So the general training can be strength, can be something else, gives you a foundation for everything else. And it's characterized by a high degree of carryover. So for example, if you decide to do barbell squats, you know for a fact that you're going to jump higher, you're going to run faster, you're going to hit harder, and so on and so forth.
So just to clear this up, what Pavel is talking about, GPP is called General Physical Preparation. That's what you do as an athlete to build up your general fitness. Then there are exercises, your SPP, specific physical preparation. There are exercises that you do that'll lend themselves perfectly to assist you in your particular sport. Now, while I most definitely agree, and I've read some stuff about the Soviet research and the Soviet sciences when it comes to building athletes, is we always have to make this distinction. If you are an athlete, GPP and SPP is very important. If you are not an athlete, which many of us are not, many of us will just engage into GPP, general physical preparation, to help us stay in shape.
If you decide to go leg extensions, you can be sure that you're going to get better at leg extensions.
Pavel says if you do the leg extension, you just get better at the leg extension. And I had a similar kind of idea until I have had a conversation with Dr. Michael Yessis. And a leg extension might prove itself valuable, for example, if you have a runner who needs specific strength in a particular degree of a range of motion of a joint action where the leg extension might be useful. But in order to use a leg extension properly in a training schedule of an elite athlete, you have to have a high-level coach and a high-level biomechanist.
One of the things that I noticed that I thought was really weird was when I started doing kettlebells, things that I wasn't doing, I got stronger at.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't doing dips for a long time. Like, I didn't do them for months and months. And I was just doing kettlebells.
Mm-hmm.
I was just doing cleans, presses, snatches, swings, a bunch of different squat protocols, overhead squats.
Mm-hmm.
My dip went through the roof.
Awesome, though.
But it was so strange. It was like...
We call this the what the hell effect. So that type of carryover, some of it we can understand, some of it we can explain, some of it we can't.
I think the what the hell effect, or the kettlebell effect, as I'd like to say it, that there is some merit to it. However, if you look at the Soviet research, the only thing that these guys were doing with kettlebells is deadlifts over 2 blocks, where when you go down into the bottom position of the deadlift, or it's probably even a squat, you get more range of motion. So that's one of the only exercises that these guys were doing. Most of the stuff they were doing was with barbells. There's 2 things that I can say that probably make sense to explain this type of characteristic when it comes to the what the hell effect. I think if you are training with kettlebells exclusively, let's say like you're doing cleans, right? So, or a long cycle. And now, all of a sudden, you stop it and you start building strength with barbell squat, heavy barbell squats, heavy bench press, heavy deadlifts. I think your long cycle will get better because you are improving either your relative strength or your absolute strength, depending on what kind of athlete you are. So there's that carryover as well. Another thing that is fascinating is when you read the Soviet research is these guys were saying, listen, every 3 to 4 weeks, we have to switch things up because your nerve muscle system will get tired of doing the same exercises over and over again. And if you do something completely new, your nerve muscle system gets new excitement, and there might be some interesting carryover into your sport when you go back to it or back into these exercises that you do on a regular basis?
Yeah, we've had the kettlebell swing, for example, increase the performance of world champion powerlifters and top marathon runners at the same time. It's a very bizarre thing. And again, some of it I can decipher, some of it I can't, but hey, we'll take it, right?
The reason why you probably cannot decipher it is because carryover probably lends itself from every type of training modality that you are not used to. That's just my guess, and I love kettlebells.
What do you think is going on there, if you had a guess?
Okay, so it's a number of different things. One is the type of breathing patterns that we use, for example, for endurance, that helps strengthen endurance. So we use this pressurized breathing that increases your strength on exhalation, so that pretty much increases your strength at any kind of exertion, whether it's punching or lifting.
And I think he's right. The more powerful you become at breathing, or the stronger your breathing muscles are, the better your performance. And that's a simple explanation. Just imagine, if I'm able to exhale and throw out the trash more quickly and more powerfully, I'm able to get in more good stuff more easily, more readily, more quickly, and better available. So improving the way you breathe is most definitely the way to go.
Mr. Haney was a coach for Donnie Thompson. Donnie Thompson he broke the 3,000-pound total record in powerlifting some years back. So I'd known Donnie for some time, so Donnie kept hurting his back and his deadlift was stuck. So we met. I showed him some kettlebell stuff. So 9 months later, he added about 70 pounds to his deadlift, 100 pounds to his bench press, set the total record.
And while I think that this anecdotal reference is interesting, I want to always relate back to this great conversation that I've had with Dr. Michael Yessis. And if you're interested in watching this conversation, check the link in the description. What Dr. Michael Yessis says is, let's say, for example, we want to bring the deadlift up, or somebody hurts their back or whatever have you. And now you have these folks do kettlebell swings. You are depending on luck in that regard. These are Dr. Michael Yessis' words. Because yes, it might be that you're getting better at it, but there's no guarantee. And how can you guarantee that an athlete gets better at the particular exercise? Is understanding where the athlete is lacking. Scrutinize the athlete, not only on his performance, but on the way he lifts, the joint actions and everything. Have a professional biomechanist look at it, who can tell you, okay, this is where this guy is lacking. And this leads to these SPP exercises. So while I agree that a kettlebell might help you, it's rather considered a GPP than an SPP tool.
Whatever things that happens within the muscle is positive more than negative. And I think part of it is very well-dosed ballistic loading. The body adapts to it extremely, extremely well. Part of it has to do with the particular training protocols we have, because we produce the right amount of acid, but not too much acid.
And that's this anti-glycolytic protocol that Pavel is referring to. And like I mentioned earlier, this highly depends on your sport and your goals and where you have to move. If you want to become a better marathon runner or a better sprinter, you have to jump into the systems, into the red zone, most definitely in that regard, because this would be your SPP exercise, sprints, for example, right? But a powerlifter probably doesn't need sprints. I want to quote again what I've heard the late, great Louis Simmons say, rest in peace. He was a big proponent of Dr. Yuri Verkhoshansky's as well as Dr. Michael Yessis' work. And he was big into SPP exercises. And one thing that he said that really struck with me is, if you want to bring up your performance, if you are a lightweight athlete, you have to bring up your absolute strength. If you are a heavyweight athlete, you have to bring up your relative strength.
A lot of trainees in the kind of a pop fitness world, they're just enamored with burn. Like, oh, go for the burn.
Yeah.
And while I agree that we are in love with the burn mentality and that we can dial it back a little bit, just because everybody is jumping on the hype bandwagon of the burn, so to speak, doesn't mean that the burn itself is a bad thing. I think it just depends on the right dosage. And sometimes we, normal trainees, make the mistake that we try to replicate what high-level athletes are doing. And when you look at what high-level athletes, especially back in the Soviet days, from this research, what these guys were doing, if we look at it, with our perspective, we probably think, what are these guys doing? But they are highly focused on bringing up their skill and their performance. And if you train just to stay in shape, I don't think you always need to stay in the burn. However, it doesn't mean that the burn is a bad thing, because it can still benefit you throughout your whole journey of getting fitter, stronger, and more into shape.
Because what happens, you have too much lactic acid.
Right.
Here's what happens. Well, many things happen. We don't have the time to discuss this on the show, but most of them are really rather negative. Some positive, most of them rather negative. It makes you more sore, for sure. It doesn't literally burn holes in your muscle, but it does stimulate lysosomes, something that kind of eats up defective components of the cell to function.
And if a chemical engineer or whatever kind of profession is in the comments right now, please let me know, because I have been digging into this, what Pavel was saying, and I couldn't find anything, or maybe my search skills are not as adequate, but I really would like to know if Pavel's on the right path. What we know is nowadays that lactic acid is not the devil. Lactic acid is actually a good thing, because this is what transports the hydrogen ions outside of your muscles. And the hydrogen ions, that's what causes the muscle to be more acidic. And if the muscle reaches a certain threshold of these hydrogen ions and lactic acid is not able to transport or deliver your muscle, then what happens is your muscles will cramp up and stop working. So lactic acid is actually a good thing. But I'm not a professional on this, so if you know more, let me know down as a discussion in the comments.
We try to, and plus there's other stuff happens, like body starts producing ammonia, which is toxic.
Now, if Pavel is on the right track with what he's saying, then every sprinter and endurance athlete, especially high endurance athlete, let's say a hockey player, for example, should stay away from the burn, which doesn't really make sense in that regard. But I'm not a professional on this, so if you have more knowledge or you are a professional in that specific field, please let me know in the comments.
And depletes your ATP. So all these things start going, they're really sideways. So I think the nature of what you do with kettlebells, especially if you use the correct protocol, is you just optimize this metabolic environment.
The funny thing is, whenever you move, if I do this depletes ATP, and that isn't a bad thing. So I'm really wondering where Pavel was going with this. And depending on the intensity that you choose to engage into your training, your body has a wonderful and powerful mechanism. It's called the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, that your body is able to recuperate and replenish your ATP stores. So yeah, I don't really know where Pavel is going with this.
I challenge anybody to find a pressing exercise that's biomechanically more perfect for the shoulder than the kettlebell military press.
100% agree with Pavel right here. Because of the weight displacement of the kettlebell, when you press it overhead, your shoulder has to work in harmony, in union, in unison. This is a beautiful way to strengthen your shoulder, especially your rotator cuff muscles and your ligaments and everything that is entangled in the shoulder joint, because we have to understand the shoulder is one of the most mobile and also one of the most volatile joints. So making it strong is one of our biggest missions when it comes to human performance, or just getting in shape in general. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. You know what's beautiful about talking to many individuals in the kettlebell world as well as outside is you get an insight that you can't get from anywhere else. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy this podcast that I'm having. And I'm reading through these books right now, especially from Dr. Michael Yesses. And now I even understand what Pavel is saying, and I can even maybe add something on top of it and see that while I agree with Pavel on certain things, I see it a little bit differently on other situations, because I have insightful knowledge from other places. Upshot of the situation, always listen to everybody, and just like Bruce Lee, take what is good and discard what is not. So here's the next step that you have to do. You have to like the video, consider subscribing, share it with a friend, and then check out this video where I teach you everything around the kettlebell. Maybe you're new to kettlebell, maybe the algorithm threw you this video right into your feed and you're like, hey, what is this guy? What are these bald men? What is this guy with gray hair talking about kettlebells? If you're interested, check it out right here.